Okay, first an advert, because we're in the privatized world of Web3. We're doing some stuff at a small art gallery, the collective that I'm part of called 0xSalon. And that is happening both on Saturday afternoon from 3 till 5 and the Friday afterwards on the 22nd in the afternoon. And those are some weird projects we might have time to talk about in a minute, but it's not the reason I'm talking to you today. One other piece of advertising, which is in the main DevCon conference in the next few days, there's an exhibition of a mix of artists and sci-fi writers did some projects. I have a poem set to some panels included called Etude Inite. It's a study on infinity as with respect to the infinite garden theme of Ethereum and DevCon this year. So here's a poem I wrote kind of about infinity. Here's a stanza of it to cleanse your ears out before we start. The infinite guardian, the notion of infinity embedded within the logics of the transcendental outside, presupposes and necessitates the existence of finitude as its corollary. There is no infinity without infinitude. One cannot exist without the other, serving Kant. Alpha and Omega, abstraction, limitation, prophecy, hagiography, authority. Ontologically, make Ethereum great again. The age of Aquanarius dawns, a torrent of liquidity, flood broadcast, perpetual swamps. Twixt cardinals and cardinality, inadequatiore et intellectus. All right. Okay, here we go. Here's the talk. Talk is called Sifrpunk. And that's a new word, so I'll have to explain what it is. There it is in, like, I've tried to write it in Arabic. If anyone reads Arabic and I've got that wrong, please let me know. My Arabic is not as good as it should be. Okay, wonderful. We're getting, like, thumbs up from the audience. That's great. I can read and write, but I can't. I can speak, but not read and write. Okay, wonderful. So, okay, we're going to start with a disclaimer, because I realized there's a problem with giving this talk here, which is people will disagree with what I'm going to talk about, and I also disagree with some of it. I'm just taking an extreme position to illustrate what some people think, and it's not what I think completely, or is it? I don't know. We'll leave that open to debate. This is a provocation exploring an extremely specific purist opinion that I don't wholly share, but think it's an interesting area to at least explore. Many might find these ideas objectionable, and that's kind of the point. I don't hold these positions myself. I would not die on these hills. Lol. Okay, and then I want to show you, like, I have some prior form on, like, let's say, provocations and agitations. So here's some memes I used to make under the clandestine alias of the Byzantine Business School in 2017 to 2019, in the early days of Ethereum. And some of these are not kind to what Ethereum was doing back then, which we're going to get to in a minute. Okay, this is my biographical slide. I found this stuff quite early on. I was a sincere reformist kind of researcher, trying to build tools and make theories that improve what I saw happening in the space. And then something changed, and now I'm irony poisoned and black-pilled. So maybe we'll get into that. Who knows? Maybe you can guess. Okay, then, like, a few things that I've done that are kind of like source material for the stuff we're going to talk about in part. So a year or so ago, I co-wrote with my friends Max Hamscher and Paul Zeidler the foreword to the key accelerationist text, Capitalism's Transcendental Time Machine by Anna Greenspan. It's a book version of her PhD thesis, which came out at the turn of the century. So I know there's lots of talk about A, ACK and B, ACK and C, ACK and D, ACK here. But, like, I don't know if how many people here use those terms without having read any of the key texts or thought about these theories beyond the aesthetics of them. These are, in essence, theories of time. I would suggest you read a primer like this one on the screen if you want to know more. Okay, I also wrote for the Journal of Agorism, which has a book stand at DevCon on Wednesday. You could go get a copy of this magazine. I wrote a thing called Necro-Primitivism Rising for that. It's a critique of the social cult of Bitcoin. I wrote this also with a project with Max Hamscher and Paul Zeidler, Reminiscences of a Clock Operator. And this is like exploring and laying out a new theory of machine time with respect to blockchains, particularly stochastic ones, as in proof-of-work blockchains. I have an editorial column at the MIT Computational Law Report, where I write things like this about code, law, and chains. There's a meme about Pepe on the screen over there. And like we're in the East now. And in the East, Pepe is a symbol of freedom in some places, not racism and groypers like you think from the West. So please decolonize your notions of Pepe before we continue. I wrote for an art context, Spike Art magazine. They had a Web3 issue, and this is the feature essay from that, The Revolution Will Not Be Tokenized, critiquing NFTs and token art at the peak of the pipe bubble, 22. Okay, yeah, I used to run this MIT journal, Crypto Economic Systems. Wow, this is hard. Works even less well than Ethereum. Okay, and then before that, I was doing fork studies. This is as an independent researcher. So I had a project called Forkonomy, where I was studying the network splits that happened in 16 and 17 between Bitcoin and Ethereum, as a way, initially, just to find like-for-like comparisons that we could do. We could study under an analytical lens. I was mixing data science and epistemology. I now realize I thought I was doing computer science back then. Computer scientists didn't agree. Okay, can I get a GM? GM, okay, good morning. GM, mornings are good. This is a reference to greetings among Bitcoin and blockchain users and followers on social media. This joke, such as it is, refers to the value of getting involved in a given crypto finance proposition early on and the expectations for a bright future. I think that's one of the things that motivates a lot of people in a place like DEF CON. Sifrpunk. All right, so Cypherpunk, like I'm sure somebody else will talk about the linguistic origins of this, but I thought I would just do a rough treatment of it. So the word cipher is derived from the Arabic word safar, which means zero. And so I thought we would just trace the history of this concept of zero. Seems to have, well, let's start from the nearer history. So in the 1200s, Fibonacci and others transliterated the term, the Arabic term of cipher, into Latin as Zephirium, and Greek as Zephirium, Zephyrus, Sifra, then into Zephiro or Zephyr, and then towards zero and cipher. So remember that. Zero is a key concept here, nothingness, or a void. Adds nothing, leaves things unchanged. A withholding even, a negation if you multiply by it. To silence, or to avoiden, to hide. Okay, we know some of these like linguistic touch points, we hear them at conferences like this. Okay, and then, wait. Oh yeah, I think I missed a slide. Oh no, we're going forwards now. Blockchains only work in one way. I need to go back several slides. One more. One more. Yes, here, thank you. Okay, then, so it looks like this term came from like both Babylonian and Mayan cultures had this concept of a placeholder that's a nothing, a void, that we know that number 14 is different than number 1004, for example. In Sanskrit, we have the concept of shunya, which seems to have arisen like about 2,200 years ago, and it was being used as a number several centuries later. The Arabs came through South Asia, and then this concept was kind of brought back to the West Asia, and there were institutions like the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Knowledge in Baghdad, where a lot of the great mathematics that is now the foundation for like Western systems of logic and thought seems to have in part arisen. So we end up with Cipher, and then Cipher got transliterated into Latin and Greek, Zephyr, Zephira, as we said earlier, and then zero and cipher. Okay, that's all well and good, I think. Okay, I'm going to skip that. Here's a meme. Financial growth, exponential financial growth. Exponential financial growth on a planet with finite resources, and then, like, I probably don't need to explain the universal paperclips game. I guess most of you have played it. But anyway, you play this game, web-based game, as a humble paperclip merchant. You convert strips of metal into paperclips. Then you start getting tools. You can automate this process, abstract, automate, and accelerate. And you finish the game running a squadron of hyperdimensional intelligences stripping the planet or the universe for all available material. And that's what I see in today's like market-driven capitalist logics. There's an optimization function, and it doesn't really care about you or me. All right. I'm not saying it's good or bad, it's just like it's a seems to be a thing. Baudrillard of simulacrum fame has actually got quite a nice conceptual lens to think about these things from his later work, for example, Symbolic Exchange and Death. I'm going to read you a quote. "We now live in a world dominated by the free play of the monetary sign that is beyond reference to any real of production or even a monetary referent in the form of a gold standard. In this world, the idea of a real value, of equities, of commodities, of houses, of anything, is meaningless, as what matters instead is not value per se, but infinite speculation. This new world is marked by the emergence of a brothel of capital, not for prostitution, but for substitution and commutation." Again, that was Baudrillard writing before all this crypto stuff happened. So take a look at his work sometime, perhaps. Okay, skip that. You know about this stuff, the cathedral and the bazaar, the idea that horizontality is good, peer-to-peer is good, and the hierarchies are bad. But what about if there are cathedrals inside the bazaars, implicit power structures? What about tragedies of commons? What about insider asymmetries, co-option, capture, and ultimately also the tyranny of structurelessness, the cognitive load it requires to navigate horizontalized spaces makes it hard. And that's why we slip back into the convenience of hierarchies, centralized stuff, which is what I see in today's Ethereum. Okay, next slide. Can you go forwards one? Okay, here's another concept that's useful, the price of anarchy. This came out of like behavioral economics and packet switching and routing networks, that in the absence of hierarchical coordination, there is a price in terms of effort and ultimately, cost to doing things in a more horizontal way. And that, again, is a tension I see in all these networks where it's just much more convenient to have a small number of authorities, whether they're explicit or implicit. And a lot of the things I see in Ethereum are implicit power structures where we give the appearance of horizontality, but underneath that or behind that might not be quite so egalitarian, shall we say. All right. The downward spiral. So I wanted to do a little bit of historical digging, archaeological digging, because it's now 2024, almost 2025. There's some things that happened very, very long ago in the early days of Ethereum, which I don't know how many people were around for those things. I don't know how much they get talked about now. But anyway, there was a thing called the DAO. Like the early days of Ethereum, one of the first major projects on Ethereum, 2015, 16. I guess it was launched in early 16. In a bit of a hurry, there was some people calling for the slowdown on issuing all the contracts. It was going very fast. And I guess you all know the story, so I don't want to tell it too much, but there was an exploit, there was a vulnerability, re-entrancy flaw in the Solidity contracts, and some entity started draining this thing of funds. And then there was a big question about what can be done about this thing. And ultimately, we know that Ethereum split into two factions. One, we missed it. Can we go back one? Back one? Yeah, do you remember the meme on the right? It's very good. So pay attention. Okay, and so we are now today at this, we're at the Cypherpunk Congress. Cultural researchers talk about Cypherpunk being one of the main verticals of Ethereum culture. Vitalik writes things like, make Ethereum Cypherpunk again. But I'm going to take the position here, remember the disclaimer earlier, that Ethereum was never Cypherpunk and it can never be Cypherpunk because of what happened in 2016. And so it's interesting for me that when I looked at this article again this morning, most of the examples in it were Bitcoin stuff. And I think last time I checked, Bitcoin is not Ethereum. I think there's a strong argument to say that Bitcoin still embodies quite a lot of cypherpunk values at the expense of possibly boiling the oceans with the proof of work, maybe. All right. Forwards. Okay, code is law. Who remembers code is law? Okay, so in the early days of crypto culture, we thought we could build technological substrates and encode our values and norms into them in a hard way, and that would be fine. And we'd launch these things into the universe, and they would just run unstoppably until the end of time. Until we started trying to do that, and it seemed like it was kind of messy and imperfect, and we had a lot of problems. So this concept of code is law comes from the 90s, both from Larry Lessig, who's credited with it usually, but also from William Mitchell, City of City of Bits, I think his book was called in the 90s, before Lessig. So Lessig's definition is a form of regulation where private actors may embed their values into the technological artifacts. But that was in the 90s, when all we could really do with this code was put it in places to share online and not really have kind of like living autonomous machines, agents, ecosystems, living kind of on their own, which is where we seem to be now. So you could say that Lessig and Mitchell failed to consider Homo bloconomicus, this will to economically automate and scale all these things at the expense of everything else. And so if Cypherpunks write code and code is law, where does that take us? I don't know. Maybe you know. Tell me later. Okay, so like there's this concept from paper by Ben Green and Salome Villion in the ACT FAT Conference 2020 called algorithmic formalism. Oh, sorry, the paper's called algorithmic realism as a counterpoint to algorithmic formalism. And what I see in at least in the early days of the blockchain space, but there's still somewhat of a remnant scent of this thing, stench in the room, is that like the formalist thinking, that we can just build these things, the code is law idea, we can build these things, launch them into the world, we're not liable for those, they're just code, but they act as if, you know, they live on till the end of time. Just by the way, like the idea of code is law, does anyone know, like, does the law change? Law. That changes, right? So if code is law, means code doesn't change because law doesn't change, but law changes, because it has to, right? It has to evolve and update. And if you have these formalist structures, you're not going to be able to respond to shifting sands of time and space. All right. Let's skip the critiques, that's fine. You can look them up if you want. They're good. Okay, I was going to talk about the Ethereum thing, the DAO thing. Okay, so like, I guess let's just go through the history of it. So there was the attack, then there was this thing, this referendum, this carbon vote, one token, one vote. Those are the results. It was meant to be indicative. It wasn't meant to be like binding at the time, which sounds a bit like the Brexit referendum, which happened actually around then, interestingly. So you can see that this thing was like somewhat gerrymandered by large token holders that didn't even bother to hide that fact. And then the thing became binding, as I recall. The idea was to like delete that exploit as balances and carry on. And I don't think it was expected that some people would not jump ship onto the new fork, the fork which we call Ethereum now. Instead, they would stay on the trajectory of the previous rules and the previous history without the DAO exploiter getting their balances deleted through a state transition. And then we ended up with 2 Ethereums for a bit. That was kind of confusing. So I did all these fork research projects. I'm not going to go into it in detail now, but this is all like reporting on this stuff from the time at the time. I also spoke at so I also spoke at Ethereum Classic conference in 2018 about this fork-based research, and that was interesting because I went to Seoul to do that, and I realized there was kind of like not a very big community around that network, shall we say. It's like just a few people with lots of resources and making it look like a community. So at least there's a community here around Ethereum. That is probably what these things are actually about, if we're going to be real about it. It's about the people that subscribe to these ideas or possibilities rather than a particular set of equations that govern the reality we want to metaphysically manifest. Anyway, top right is like from a group chat when they closed all the exchanges down. So again, Cypherpunk. Okay, so I found this paper yesterday called The Censor's Burden. I thought this was just really interesting as a kind of thing to think about. I don't actually have any high quality thoughts about it, but I wonder if you guys do. Censorship involves, inter alia, adopting a certain type of epistemic policy. While much has been written on the harms and benefits of free expression and the associated rights thereof, the epistemic preconditions of justified censorship are relatively underexplored. In this paper, I argue that examining intrapersonal norms of how we ought to treat evidence that might come to us over time can shed light on interpersonal norms of evidence generation and sharing that are relevant in the context of censorship. The upshot is that justified censorship requires the censor to meet a very high epistemic burden regarding the target propositions. Importantly, one that exceeds knowledge. So censorship is a dangerous game, and like you don't know where it takes you. So that's the point we're making here. Here's a meme. I used to show this meme to talks to the Bitcoiners, because it's kind of like what the Bitcoiners think of Ethereum, and like it's not kind, right? So this location is the Pacific island of Yap, and there's the giant rocks, the rhinestones, which are this form of money for this small social group. Bitcoiners always talk about this, because it's a form of like dumb rocks, commodity money, which is what they see Bitcoin as, and like, you know, for better or worse. And so this is one of the people involved in Ethereum explaining to a Pacific Islander how an irregular state transition works. And you know, then they're also then looking at their rocks thinking, wow, we can't do that with our rocks. Interesting. Okay. Okay, so Ethereum Classic was the continuation of the, you know, the DAO hacker timeline. And Ethereum Classic adopted this credo of Cody's law as one of the core parts of their system of beliefs, or whatever you want to say, you know, slogans. Here are the fork studies that I used to do. So this is after the fork. I'll be studying like the relationship of Earth time to block time, how regularly the blocks are coming. Remember that Ethereum Classic was a minority network, but they're both doing proof of work at the time. Ethereum Classic had a fraction of the hash rate. So there was all kinds of funny business that was like potentially going to happen there. And the slide on the bottom right is what I told the ETC people in 2018. And I tell you what, all of them happened. And then like when the enormous 51% attack happened in 2019, or I think 19, I got called into a community post-mortem of the network disaster management. I think several weeks of transactions got reorganized by an enormous 51% attack. And on the call was like 10 people, and they were just deciding what to do. And I was like, oh, we're back to the can you guys stop trading again, but on the other side. Okay. Narrative evolutions of money. I think this is, Ethereum over time. I'm sure people have done this more recently. I just dig out this old slide just to show you that the ethnographic studies of the network seems to suggest that the social imaginaries around these networks change over time. And like this idea of Ethereum being cypherpunk is a relatively new kind of adoption of a cultural signifier, and just trying to fill in some history for people that might not realize things that happened in the past that might contradict those cultural imaginaries. Okay, so here's a little bit from a book that I wrote that never came out. It was called DAOs and Don'ts, Dictators, Cartels and Pyramids in P2P Systems. Nobody wanted to publish it or fund it, unsurprisingly. Okay, there may exist a series of shadow power structures, allowing powerful insiders to exercise clandestine influence over the path that a network may take through manipulation of in-protocol and or extra-protocol governance mechanisms. The emergence of a social Sybil asymmetric governance vector whereby striated cadres of network insiders, developers, marketeers, miners, gradually consolidate effective power and influence by arbitraging governance mechanisms, leveraging the intimate knowledge of their function. I wrote that in 2018, and if you look at what happens in things like DeFi now, I think that's basically what's happening everywhere in DeFi now. The stakes there now. Before it was indirect, but there were still some egregious examples of manipulation by insiders to kind of put their thumbs on the scales of these governance systems. I talk a lot about Dash in particular, with their kind of DAO voting funding thing, got completely manipulated by insiders. Okay, here's a gate I found in Thailand. I'm keeping the gate of the Ethereum garden, the infinite Ethereum garden right now. Ethereum's everywhere for those with gates to keep, as somebody might say. Okay, I think I'm actually towards the end now, so I was going to read you a short poetic refrain. This is a real, we actually made this glass window. It was in an exhibition in Geneva last year, by the way. The Father, the Son, the Merkle fruit, legacy and ligature, the sorcerers of Saracens, writing hex they can't cash, connoisseur of consensus, casting their shadow bands, crossolalia echoes throughout NATO's cave, spirits on the western wall, a Quetzal's Hagrach, Shibboleth Ethereum, the ecstasy of communification. Crypto means corruptography. Upon the stormy haven, Teutonic Knights 2.0 assemble, back on their bullshit again. Schism, Skitsco, ski slopes, cyber crusade imaginaries for the click clock generation, scribed upon the gates of the Bit Inquisitor's palace. Thou shalt not create a machine in the likeness of a Bitcoin mine. Trashes to trash, trashes to rashes, trust to rust. Bro apocalypse now. As 'twas foretold, there would be a terrible threat, questioning life itself. Something must be done, and so it was. The Starts is born. At the Byzantine Business School, a toxic environment to facilitate adversarial thinking. No hope, no really, no really. Us in a democracy, one cannot engage a barbarian with reason, nor wit. Mott and Bailey, Mo a bailouts. Citadel Boy and Rodney. Might it be any other way than this? The logics of the reaper encoded within the sower, a new global pillage powered by corruptography. I think that's it. Yeah, I could do a bit more on Bitcoin, but I think I might be out of time. Do I have time? 4 minutes. Okay, we're going to do Sifrpunk, which is Bitcoin. Right. Okay, so before, I'm working on a book at the moment, which is a decolonial critique of network states. Before that, I was working on a research project, which was the ecological, economic and social externalities of proof of work, in particular Bitcoin, since Ethereum left the room on that particular debate. This is a hermeneutic diagram by Clara Coffin from the theatre production we made about Bitcoin called The Black Hole of Money, 2022. Okay, Bitcoin, the inhuman monetary system. Fractals don't care about your feelings. Systems disregard their externalities. Formalisms cannot reason about the real. Aside from a single course difficulty adjustment feedback mechanism, Bitcoin's proof of work is insensate. It cannot care about what happens outside of its borders, only that the piper is paid. Proof of work pits capital and ecology against each other in a prisoner's dilemma-style paradox that could tip the balance in favor of a hothouse Earth. Okay, Bitcoin hash rate chart. This number definitely mostly goes up. The start of the chart is not even the beginning of the network, that's just 2018. It's already 9 years deep by that point. So this number is going up, and that is like an indirect frame of reference of the ecological footprint of the energy consumption of Bitcoin. Remember that Bitcoin doesn't care what energy you give it, just energy. So like in the future, it might be clean and beautiful energy, but might not be that. Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry. I could go back one. Thank you. Yeah, and the pictures along the top. It's like mining farms getting flooded in the south of China back in the day or catching on fire. Empty, like, locations after the legal changes and updates in China a few years ago. And the bottom, it's a bunch of ASICs in shipping containers being powered by stranded natural gas on fracking sites. So it's not all bad, or is it? Next. Okay, so Bitcoin is a decentralized clock, and the way it regulates its ticking is that by every 2 weeks, the difficulty adjustment changes the probability of a cycle of computation, one of the proofs of work, finding a block. It's a lottery system in a way. So it's a stochastic clock that is divorced from the logics of the sun, moon, stars. And it's actually, in some people's opinion, the first time we've ever really done that. So Bitcoin's amazing, but it comes at a cost, right? And that is that it will never know satiety in terms of energy requirements. And so if we live on a planet which is on the edge and Bitcoin wants all the energy, you can see how something might have to give. And actually, since I wrote all these works, the insatiable demand of energy by AI is actually possibly rendering this moot now. Because if we're just like spinning up nuclear reactors for AI stuff, maybe it'll be fine. Maybe it'll be fine. Maybe not. Okay, yeah, just to say something about like, so Bitcoin is kind of a land where code is law. It's very, very hard to change. Like, you know, Web3 people say, oh, nothing ever happens on Bitcoin, and there's a reason for that, because it's very hard to make changes to that. I used to work in the Digital Currency Initiative at MIT Media Lab, which at the time was the largest concentration of open source Bitcoin developers in the world, and I saw how conservative they were and hesitant to change anything. All right. Okay, we're going to skip through because I think I'm pretty much out of time. Bitcoin doesn't care if you're right-wing. It is right-wing. Bitcoin is petro-masculinity. Look that up. Good concept. Explains a lot of things about proof of work. Narrative evolutions of Bitcoin, which happen slower, less than Ethereum. And I'm going to finish with a poetic refrain. The church and the network, zeal and time, death and money, all sides of the same coin. Thank you very much.